faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, the book we're discussing is Between the World and Me by African-American author Ta-Nehisi Coates. On May 25th, 2020, in Minneapolis, USA, a white police officer knelt on the neck of a black man, George Floyd, for nearly 9 minutes on the street, causing his death by suffocation. Once revealed, this incident immediately sparked nationwide protests like wildfire, causing the most severe social unrest in the U.S. in decades. Why did a black man's death trigger such massive demonstrations in America? Today's book will help you understand the deep-rooted conflicts behind this event. This book reveals how many African Americans today view their circumstances and what they truly feel inside. Why is their anger so easily ignited? The book's title, Between the World and Me, comes from a 1935 poem by Black novelist Richard Wright, which describes a horrific lynching of a Black person by white Americans. One early morning, walking through woods, suddenly I stepped on him, found him in a grassy clearing, oak and elm trees towering nearby. His dark details slowly revealed themselves, flooding the space between the world and me. Author Coates borrows this poem to continue African American writers' critique of white people and their racism. The book unfolds as letters, 3 messages Coates wrote to his young son. In these letters, Coates describes his love and fears as a Black father, recalling childhood terrors while analyzing America's structural violence against Black people. And he tells his son, Black people are Americans too, but the American dream is just a nightmare for most of us. Though framed as a father's private words to his son, it clearly speaks from many voices. Upon its 2015 release, the book topped the New York Times bestseller list and won the National Book Award, NAACP Image Award, and other honors. Coates received the 2015 MacArthur Genius Grant and was named to Time's 100 Most Influential People in 2016. Time magazine wrote in his citation, "Many of us have long known that Ta-Nehisi Coates is one of America's most moving and thoughtful voices. His timely, eloquent works, grounded in solid research on racial issues and the country's disgraceful history of inequality, have become essential reading." But before we explore this book's content, we should first understand the history of Black people in America. As early as 1513, Juan Garrido, a Black man born in West Africa who had immigrated to Spain, arrived in Florida with a Spanish expedition. He came with the Spanish expedition to Florida, becoming one of the first Black people to set foot on that land. Note that this man named Juan was not a slave, but a free person. It wasn't until over a century later, in 1629, that 20-some Black slaves were brought to Jamestown, Virginia, by the British warship White Lion. Thus began the formal history of slavery in North America. During the American Revolutionary War, from 1775 to 1783, over 9,000 Black men joined the Continental Army, or state militias, to fight for independence of the 13 British colonies. Yet, their struggle didn't win independence or liberation for themselves. Jefferson's Declaration of Independence stated, "All men are created equal," but this didn't include Black people, Native Americans, or women. The U.S. Constitution preserved slavery and protected the slave trade. By the mid-19th century, America had 4 million Black slaves. In 1861, the Civil War erupted. As the war progressed, abolitionist positions became clearer and were implemented through the Emancipation Proclamation and constitutional amendments. After 2.5 centuries, Black Americans finally broke free from being born into slavery. Yet post-Civil War America remained a land of white supremacy. Among the more extreme examples was the Ku Klux Klan. This organization sought to restrict the political and social status of freed Black slaves. More moderate were Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation by separating Blacks and whites in public spaces, like requiring separate waiting rooms at all stations. White children and black children were to attend different schools, among other things. In 1964, Jim Crow laws were officially abolished. However, racial discrimination hasn't disappeared from American society even today. As an African American, what has Coates experienced throughout his life? Why, he said the American dream is just a nightmare for black people. So what advice did he give his son? I'll now interpret this book for you through these three questions. First, let's look at Coates's life experiences. Coates was born on September 30th, 1975 in Baltimore, Maryland. By conventional standards, his family could be considered an intellectual one. His grandfather was a learned man, obsessed with books. His collection filled every room, even overflowing the living room into packed boxes stored in the basement. His father also loved reading and was actively involved in the civil rights movement. He once served as chairman of the Maryland chapter of the Black Panther Party. But these intellectuals weren't as gentle as we might imagine. Coates was often beaten severely by his father as a child. Once during a family outing, Coates slipped away and played alone for a few minutes. Quote, quote, when he returned, his father immediately pulled out his belt and began beating him publicly, saying to his mother, "Even if I don't beat him, the police will." Like most African American children, Coates grew accustomed to violence from an early age. Violence came not just from home, but permeated the streets. In West Baltimore, where Coates lived, black teens wore tilted baseball caps and baggy clothes, with fierce eyes and constant swearing, passing time through dancing and brawls.
Every day he worried about safely reaching school and returning alive, considering who to walk with, group size, walking posture, who to acknowledge, and who might throw a friendly punch. "Stop!" he cried.
When Coates was 11, he saw a group of boys in a parking lot, one his age playing with a gun, slowly drawing and redrawing it, eyes burning with rage.
Coates was terrified, knowing if that boy shot him, everything would end.
That boy didn't shoot because it wasn't necessary, but he made Coates realize his life could end randomly. Just surviving each day felt like a victory. In evenings, Coates would watch TV, where America seemed like another world entirely. A world of pot roasts, blueberry pies, and fireworks ice cream, where white boys collected football cards and dreamed of pretty girlfriends. Completely unconcerned about personal safety, Coates felt an uncrossable boundary between his reality and that world. Why was it like that? He didn't know. But he began seeking answers, feeling overwhelming injustice and cruelty during this quest. School offered temporary refuge, yet he disliked education that demanded note-taking, following knowledge's path, memorizing abstract rules. These felt distant from his lived experience. Moreover, classrooms indoctrinated mainstream American values. Useful for white elite children, but harmful for black youth, preventing them from navigating real-world risks and hostility.
Not all schools were equally flawed, in Coates's view.
Howard University became his exception. Located in Washington, D.C., this historic HBCU produced exceptional alumni, including Nobel laureate Toni Morrison and President Barack Obama. Coates loved Howard as the Mecca for Black people worldwide, gathering Nigerian royalty, AME bishops, Muslim Californians. In this vibrant Black world, Coates discovered pride in his skin. He devoured texts in Howard's African Studies library, debated Black futures in courtyards, and fell for brilliant Black women.
At Howard, fear vanished from Coates's heart.
He began publishing music reviews and essays locally, launching his writing career. After leaving Howard University, Coates pursued journalism, working for Time, The Washington Post, and The Atlantic. By conventional standards, Coates was quite successful, but he saw himself as just a fortunate exception. A tragedy involving a college classmate solidified this belief. This classmate was Prince Jones. Though Black, Jones was raised in a middle-class family with typical white elite education. He was a Christian, straight-A student, handsome and tall, with a charming smile and elegant demeanor. Yet during a drive to visit his girlfriend, a police officer shot him dead. The officer, tracking a suspect, had mistakenly identified Jones as the target. Jones's tragedy showed Coates that as a black person, no matter how hard you strive to enter white-dominated society, you remain vulnerable. Just one racist act can reduce everything to ashes. Coates attended Jones's funeral. For many days after, he'd imagined the terror of being followed by police like Jones was. This fear intensified after fatherhood, terrified his son Samori might become just another name in the news after being arbitrarily shot. Only then did he fully understand why his father had beaten him so severely after wandering off briefly as a child. Behind that rage lay desperate fear. Coates wrote, "Black people love their children, but lose them so easily." Nearly all Black Americans live enveloped in powerful, dangerous fear unimaginable to other races. Coates acknowledges his son Samori is growing up in a different era than he did. But white discrimination and hostility persist, just more covertly. Once, taking his 5-year-old to a movie in New York City's Upper West Side, the theater was packed. As they exited the elevator, his son lingered. A white woman pushed his son, saying, "Hurry up!" Instantly, emotions flooded Coates. No parent likes strangers pushing their child. But he also knew that in a black neighborhood, that white woman would never dare push a black child. Instinctively, he turned to confront her, and the woman stepped back in surprise. A white man standing nearby rushed over to defend the woman. As more onlookers gathered, the presence of fellow white people emboldened the man. He moved closer to Coates and threatened loudly, "I could have the police arrest you." Horrified, Coates immediately backed down. He wrote in his book, that woman might not consider herself racist, but Coates's lived experience taught him that evildoers never announce their evil while committing it. Today, every American claims, "I'm not racist." Yet even during the lynching era, white residents rarely admitted to being racists. But deep down, they knew they were lying. Coates tells his son in the letter, "One day you'll become a man. You'll stop listening to me. You might think the world has changed, that we no longer need to discuss the distant past. Yet Prince Jones remains with me always and will be with you too." That is Coates' own experience and feelings. So how does he view America's racial issues regarding Black people? In Coates's view, America's racial discrimination and violence against Black people aren't mere mistakes in the nation's development. On the contrary, they are foundational to America itself.
America's prosperity has always been built on structural oppression, exploitation, and violence against Black people. Black slavery formed the wealth foundation of British North America and America's initial capital.
Owning slaves was once a symbol of civilization, a ticket for whites to join America's social club. One could say white America formed as a collective to possess and control Black bodies. Of course, merely owning Black bodies wasn't enough. Whites needed to extract labor. Forcing people to work against their interests required brutality. To make slaves work, whites nailed tongues, cut off ears, and subdued bodies with whips, branding irons, saws, and stones. And if slaves tried to escape, whites killed without hesitation, leaving brains splattered and rivers of blood.
Since then, destroying Black bodies became an American tradition.
Under white enslavement, Black lives and labor transformed into sugar, tobacco, cotton, and gold. Cotton was the most significant. By mid-19th century, cotton was America's export backbone, worth more than all U.S. industries, railroads, and factories combined. America's wealthiest lived in the cotton-producing Mississippi Valley. Pre-Civil War, Mississippi declared when seceding, "Our position is thoroughly identified with slavery, the greatest material interest in the world." Post-war, many Blacks moved to cities expecting relief, but faced only more complex, covert exploitation. They needed 2 or 3 jobs just to send kids to high school and college. They endured banks' icy contempt and realtors' shameless deceit. When blacks sought mortgages, banks found endless reasons to deny loans. When touring nice neighborhoods with hard-earned cash, realtors would say, "Sorry, sold yesterday," then steer them to black areas. Even after Jim Crow's abolition, segregation persisted across America. White middle class lived in suburban towns, white poor in urban enclaves, while blacks were confined to ghettos like West Baltimore, North Philly, South Chicago, and Harlem, all classic black neighborhoods. These areas overflowed with drugs, violence, chaos, and severely lacking public services. Coates argues that trapping black children in cage-like blocks is racism's elegant expression. Federal government created sand furnaces. Teens form gangs roaming blocks, shouting, acting crude. Because only through yelling and roughness could they feel slight safety and power. Knowing they control nothing, could be beaten, raped, stabbed, or shot any minute, fear breeds rage. These kids, growing wild in harsh environments, turn brutally violent against fellow blacks over slightest disputes. This overflow of violence then invites harsh police enforcement. Frontline officers see black people as societal hazards, using excessive force during enforcement, beating, choking, even killing. And when innocent people get killed or injured, predominantly white juries are more likely to understand and support the police because police maintain social safety and order, aligning with mainstream values. Thus, police violence against black people keeps recurring, and perpetrators often face no punishment. For example, on February 26, 2012, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was returning home after buying candy and drinks. Passing through a gated community in Sanford, Florida, neighborhood watch volunteer George Zimmerman found him suspicious, called 911, and was told not to follow. Yet Zimmerman followed anyway and shot Martin dead. A year later, a jury acquitted Zimmerman. On July 17, 2014, 43-year-old Eric Garner was selling cigarettes on Staten Island, New York. Several officers suspected him of selling untaxed cigarettes and attempted to arrest him. Garner resisted.
A white officer named Daniel Pantaleo choked Garner from behind, causing fatal suffocation. On the eve of Garner's 5th death anniversary, the statute of limitations deadline for this case.
The U.S. Department of Justice decided not to prosecute that white officer. Similarly, on August 9, 2014, 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot dead by white officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. Police left Brown's body on the street for 4 hours. Coates felt this act declared that white violence against blacks would go unpunished. Ultimately, the St. Louis County grand jury decided not to indict the white officer. Coates wrote in his book, when the Michael Brown case happened, his son Samori was 15, waiting before the TV all day for the verdict. At 11 p.m., news came that the killer cop would walk free. Samori returned to his room. Coates heard his son crying outside the door. 5 minutes later, Coates entered. He didn't hug or comfort him. Instead, he said, "I pass on what your grandparents tried to tell me. This is your country. This is your world. This is your body. You must find a way to live within it."
Coates wants his son and everyone to recognize that the federal government grants police the right to destroy black bodies. From its founding, America had plunder of black lives in its blood. This violent enforcement is just history's continuation.
So for black people, the American dream doesn't exist. It's a lie calling enslavement mercy, criminals white knights, mass war, killing a sport. Even if beautiful, that dream belongs to white dreamers lying atop mountains of black bones. In America, being black means being humiliated, degraded, destroyed. No effort can turn you white. Coates tells his son, "I never ask you to be twice as good, but hope you fight every day in this brief light. Struggle through every moment of your life." White identifiers can't measure you. I won't let you fall into their dream. So what to do? One view claims Black people must work twice as hard to overcome their status, accepting half results for double effort.
Coates scoffs at this. White children aren't told to work twice as hard.
Another future-focused view says whites will become a minority in America's demographics soon. Then all racial problems would solve themselves. Famous talk show host Stephen Colbert suggested this possibility to Coates in an interview. But Coates countered, if demographics shift, power holders will change election politics. Don't be naive. Another common view. Black Americans should pursue freedom through nonviolent resistance. This view's icon is Martin Luther King Jr., America's most famous civil rights leader. A Christian minister, King dreamed blacks and whites could achieve peace through love and forgiveness.
But Coates, an atheist, despises this Christian rhetoric, opposing forgiveness for abusers, rejecting that love reforms evil.
In fact, in this book addressing African American issues, Coates never mentions Martin Luther King Jr. Instead, he clearly favors Malcolm X, who ranked second only to King in fame during the 1960s civil rights movement.
Right.
And that,
His political stance was radical, emphasizing Black power supremacy and advocating violent revolution to overthrow America's hypocritical white rule.
Coates repeatedly discusses and quotes Malcolm X in the book, saying, I love Malcolm X because he never lied, not like sanctimonious schools, blustering streets, or dreamers' worlds.
Malcolm X famously declared, "Today I stand here as myself, as a Black man. Before Republicans and Democrats existed, we were Black."
In fact, we were Black before America existed and will remain Black after America vanishes. Like Malcolm X, Coates stresses Black people's acceptance and embrace of their racial identity. He believes Black people should cherish themselves as they are, value their beautiful Black bodies. Black hair shouldn't be straightened or dyed. Black skin shouldn't be bleached. Black people shouldn't bow to whites or abandon their authentic selves. Building on this identity, Coates calls for Black unity, influenced by Malcolm X and street wisdom he learned. On the streets, if a Black boy is attacked, his friends stand with him, in solidarity, facing blows together. To Coates, the street code holds life's essential truth. He writes, we may not win. We can't control the enemy's numbers, strength, or weapons. But whether fighting or fleeing, we do it together. That's the part we control.
What we mustn't do is willingly surrender our bodies or our friends.
That said, Coates doesn't accept Malcolm X wholesale. Malcolm X advocated violent revolution to overthrow white rule and establish a separate Black nation. But Coates states he doesn't endorse violence, offering an approach fundamentally opposed to it. Coates draws from personal experience, admitting he wasn't skilled in violence, so he couldn't dominate the streets. He disliked classrooms too, unable to focus in school. But reading saved him. Coates hopes his Black community will seek truth through reading. He says, reading doesn't always provide answers, yet the quest for answers may matter more than the answers themselves. Because this quest keeps minds clear to confront despairing realities.
He wrote, "Understanding your society's foundation is brutally cruel.
But striving to comprehend this is our only advantage against madness."
Read more. Stay awake.
This is Coates' advice to his son and Black community. This advice might sound weak. In fact, the most common criticism of Between the World and Me is its lack of constructive solutions. So Coates responds, I'm a writer. I have no duty to seem hopeful. If all your movies and stories end with good guys winning outright, then your culture is dishonest about reality. My job is facing truth, discovering what I can, and describing it honestly. All right, we've now covered the main content of Between the World and Me. Note that this book represents only the author's personal perspective. Some arguments in the book appear ambiguous or inconsistent. For example, his stance on violence wavers, rejecting it while advocating fighting alongside friends. Similarly, whether Prince Joan's tragedy proves Black effort is futile remains debatable. Scholars offer diverse perspectives on America's racial issues. Leftist scholar Noam Chomsky views today's Black movement as extending Civil War unresolved conflicts, while Harlem Renaissance leaders, renowned Black writer Maya Angelou, believed racial inequality requires breaking barriers through shared humanity, not constant confrontation. Veteran journalist Jason Riley published a book titled Please Stop Helping Us. The book argues that well-intentioned policies aimed at helping Black people failed to improve socioeconomic status, instead becoming another form of harm in practice. To truly elevate Black social conditions, the first step is acknowledging that previous white-led assistance policies were ineffective. And in these discussions, Coates' perspective isn't the sharpest, but excels in emotional depth and resonance. This book captures the true feelings of many Black Americans today, helping us comprehend their intense fear and anger, key to understanding America's crucial social conflicts. All right, that concludes our interpretation of Between the World and Me. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.